Hello, my name is Clay Boykin, and I am in search of the new compassionate male. I believe in the midst of these incredible times of change, a new compassionate male is emerging as the new archetype. And this podcast is intended to give voice to both men and women on the overarching topic of compassion consciousness in men.
Hello, world. It's me, Dennis, and welcome to In Search of the New Compassionate Male. I'm Dennis Tardan. This is our panel with some wonderful guests that we've had on the podcast, and our founder, Clay Boykin, and the driving force between In Search of the New Compassionate Male. Hello, Clay.
Hi, Dennis.
Welcome to the Parliament. The Parliament has moved me deeply because we're seeing how we're so much more alike than we are different. And this beautiful panel that has been gathered here together, I would like you to introduce yourselves as we're going on and telling a little bit about what you're doing so that our audience can get an idea. Sarah, would you begin, please?
Yes, thank you. Peace be upon all of you. Thank you for joining us today. I am calling in from Toronto, Canada, and I am a co-lead of the Women and Girls Initiative of the Charter for Compassion, co-lead with Donna Mills, who's here as well. I join you here today in my capacity as the roles I fulfill, as mother, as wife and daughter, as sister. I had conversations with Clay and Dennis around how I see compassion being part of our all of whatever, whether we're within the gender spectrum or non-binary, we all have compassion within us. And how can we help each other? How can we as women, or I as a mother, lead that work? So that's the perspective I bring into our conversation, also my own faith background and those teachings. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Donna?
Thank you for being here. My name is Donna Mills, and like Sarah said, she and I co-lead the Women and Girls sector of the Charter for Compassion, which we have also expanded into a greater umbrella sector called Gender Partnerships. So when we took the lead of the Women and Girls sector, we recognized that it felt it could feel more expansive. And so it could include men and boys, and also LGBTQA plus sector of people. So all people in their inherent worth and dignity. And so we co-created, or we recreated the sector into Gender Partnerships. And under that is Women and Girls Initiative, a Men and Boys Initiative, and then an LGBTQA plus initiative, so that everybody could come into this gender partnership and experience, explore, discover what partnership means and can mean to our society that has been led by domination for so long. And so I also am a trauma-informed somatic practitioner. So I work with people in trauma through the body and to help heal ourselves, CELLVES, selves, from our cellular aspect where our deep and innate holiness lies.
Oh,
And I'm so glad to be here today.
Thank you, Donna, and welcome. Cynthia, would you please introduce yourself and tell us what you're doing here today?
Thank you, Dennis and Clay. My name is Cynthia Bricks, and I am the co-founder and co-director of Gender Equity and Reconciliation International. We have been around for 29 years. Our 30th anniversary is next year, which we're celebrating widely with a whole summit and bringing people together. So hopefully all of you will be there too. We have 3 program areas. Our signature program area is Me Too to We Together. And that really speaks about a lot of our work of bringing the truth around things that have happened to us around gender and sexuality, and speaking truth to those things, the pain of them, without shame or blame, but really bringing them forward into the light and confronting them with the power of love. as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King would say. The only way we can bring these issues out is by bringing them up, addressing them with compassion, with agape love, and moving through them to get to the other side, to healing, and really bringing all of us up into greater reverence for one another. So the signature course is Me Too to We Together. We also have a program that focuses on BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and then a program for LGBTQI plus. And I too, Sarah, I'm a mother of two beautiful adult children and a grandmother of a 2.5-year-old, a wife, and sisters. So I join you in that place of this is why I'm here. And I can't think of a better way to come into this session, but also into this world right now of thinking about healthy people, whether they are men, women, people of any gender across the world. We need healthy, whole people. And that's what brings me here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cynthia. Dr. Karambu, would you please tell us what you're doing here today?
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Clay, for having me here. My name is Dr. Karambu Ringera, and I'm calling in from Kenya in East Africa. I am the founder and president of International Peace Initiatives and the Tiriji Foundation. And with these organizations, we inspire people to step into action for peace and action for awakening. I am also a trainer and facilitator with the Gender Equity and Reconciliation International. So I have worked with Cynthia and Will on their amazing program that changed my life. And actually is the reason why I'm here, because it was during the 2019 Parliament of the World Religions in Toronto that I first met Clay, even though we didn't talk a lot at that time. But that's when he got into the Gender Equity and Reconciliation family, and we started training together. What brings me here is I am a mother of 2,000 children, literally, even though I haven't birthed each one of them myself. I have birthed them in metaphorically, in taking care of them and loving them into who they're becoming. And having grown up in a very patriarchal society, I wanted to bring up my girls and boys, to bring them up in a different way. And so I didn't want my boys to turn out to be the kind of men I had met in my life. And I didn't want my girls to experience patriarchy the way I had experienced it. So when I joined Gender Equity and Reconciliation, and then I heard that Clay was searching for the compassionate male, I was like, wow, is there one? I would like to know. And so we started this journey. and so this is why I'm here, because I know from experiencing his work that everyone has been wounded in some way by the systems through which we have grown up. And every one of us also has the capacity to heal. And so I am here because I believe that each one of us has the capacity to heal from our woundedness and to be whole, complete, pure, and enough. And that's the calling here for me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Karambu. Rick, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little about what you're doing here today?
Sure. I feel dwarfed by my predecessors who have just spoken, but I will do my best to just say hello. I'm a professor of philosophy and psychology, with a particular focus on history, evolution of consciousness, history of ideas, at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And what brings me here is, I think, I'll just mention two levels. One's the professional, the scholarly, which is one simply cannot understand the history of ideas, the intellectual and spiritual history of certainly Western civilization, but in many ways human civilization, without understanding the role of gender, the dominance of patriarchy, and the way in which our entire worldview, century after century, religious, even scientific, has been deeply shaped by certain assumptions and prejudices, and what we in depth psychology call archetypal complexes that really can shape a culture, shape a whole way of looking at things. And the more I studied that, the history of thought, and wrote about it, lectured, the more I realized that in certain ways the key, or certainly a fundamental key that is interconnected with everything else, our relationship to nature, our view of the cosmos, our understanding of the divine, all these are deeply, deeply interconnected with gender and the masculine-feminine dynamic, and how we define masculine and feminine. So that's the scholarly professional side of me. And maybe I'll just say, in the interest of time, at the personal level, it goes way back, but I had the privilege in my life of fate ordaining that I would raise my first child, a son, on my own for most of his first several years, up through age 5, almost 6, and it was just so he even called me mommy in the early months and years, but it was just tremendously nourishing. It was completely fulfilling to me to have that side of my human being, my humanity, activated, called upon in ways that I think many fathers just don't have the opportunity. And so it just that happened in coincidence with my own kind of psychological and spiritual journey, initiatory experiences I was having, recognizing these larger dimensions inside every one of us, and inside myself. And so that's there's definitely a personal meaning for all of what we're talking about, as well as kind of the larger historical perspective.
How wonderful. Will, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little about what you're doing here today, please?
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Clay, for inviting me. It's a privilege to be here. My background, I'm a physicist by training, and I worked for many years as in the area of climate change research and advocacy for sustainable energy solutions to global climate change. And in that context, back in the 80s, there was quite a bit of sexual harassment going on within the mainstream environmental movement. And so a group of us got together and this, never intending that it would go any further. And the question that we were putting forward was, are there parallels between exploitation of the earth and exploitation of the feminine? And that was a question that we began with. And what happened in those first few programs was that it unleashed an incredible intensity, which we hadn't really been prepared for. So it took us a while to develop the means to work with these issues skillfully. But that, although it was never intended to go beyond our immediate professional networks, that became the birth of this program that we now call Gender Equity and Reconciliation International. So that was the beginning of that work. And it was really, it grew over time into a program that feels foundational to transforming human consciousness and transforming our relationship with our sacred planetary home, which are so fundamental. So back at that time, I was very inspired by 2 or 3 key inspirations that really led to the founding of this work. One was from the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and he gave a number of retreats for environmentalists. And what he used to say was, what we most need to do is to hear within ourselves the sounds of the earth crying. And I was so inspired by that, and I took that and applied it in the gender arena. You know, what we most need to do is to hear within our own hearts the sounds of the opposite gender crying, or of the other gender categories crying, which is how we would put it today because of the gender spectrum. We need to, because when this happens, when we experience the pain of the other as our own pain, then there's a bridge across the hearts, which transforms us both and reestablishes that fundamental unity. And we meet in that place, as Rumi says, out beyond right and wrong, where we are one. And I have found in my lifetime that working deeply with the gender divide in the human family is one of the most powerful ways to facilitate that alchemical transformation. So what started as just a program to address a need within our environmental community became, over time, one of my major life commitments, and grew into this program that we call GERI for short, Gender Equity and Reconciliation International. One other key piece for me is that I am a devotee of the spiritual and mystical paths of the world. And the other project area is really, we call it Dawn of Interspirituality. It's really to bring the great spiritual and religious traditions of the world together. And in particular, I've been passionate about the manifestations of the feminine side of the divine, and feminine manifestations, and been following what essentially seems to me to be a universal divine feminine across major world religions, which I think is also a really important part of transforming the spiritual traditions of the world and rebalancing them. I mean, they're already there, but they have all absorbed patriarchy from the societies in which they emerged. And so there's a whole process there of transformation that's taking place that parallels the work that we're doing in the Gender Equity and Reconciliation Program. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You know, Clay, this is quite a panel that you have assembled here, and in your journey, when you began in search of the new compassionate male, can you give some background to our audience about that so that we'll understand our journey?
Thanks, Dennis. And yeah, we do have, I'm so grateful for every person here on the panel. I love you all. I think that my journey has been a lifelong journey, although I didn't call it In Search of the New Compassionate Male. I believe that I've been looking and searching to find, what is this emptiness, or what is this burn that I can't put a name to? And what is, where is the compassion within me? I think, again, I didn't have the language for it, but I've been on a journey. I was in the corporate world for 22 years. Prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps. I went off into startup businesses, and all along my career, I was climbing the wrong ladder. And but that's what happens. We come out and we go to Daddy with our arms open, and Daddy says, "Oh, we shake hands," and we kind of bounce and we look around and say, "What is it to be a man? What is it to be a man?" Oh, Rambo. Marines are looking for a few good men, and I marched off. And it wasn't until 14 years ago when it all came to a head, and I had a very serious incident, life-threatening, a heart attack, and it really began my search there, really in earnest. I remember being at the top of the Empire State Building, looking down at my little office on Park and 32nd Street, and saying, "I've made it to the top, metaphorically. I'm at the top of the Empire State Building. It's almost killed me." I looked down at my little office window down there. This has almost killed me. Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? And that's, I believe, where in earnest I began searching for myself. Who am I? And knowing that I can't do this by myself, along the way, um, I've learned a lot through every person that I've met. And I learned also that I didn't trust men. And I recognized that in order for me to grow and to understand myself, I was going to have to get over that and begin to learn how to build deep relationships. And I realized that all the men around me felt the same way. They didn't trust each other below the surface. And so I started a men's circle because that's what I needed. A safe, sacred place where men can come safely and nurture one another so we can learn that language of the heart, learn how to connect head and heart, to integrate, and then learn how to speak. I mean, I feel it, I can't speak it. And so that's been my journey. And the last 3 years have been exponential, where I've met each one of you and I've learned so much from each of you. I started the In Search of the New Compassionate Male podcast, and we've interviewed people from all over the world, women and men from all over the world, asking the question, what is a compassionate male? And I say male, I'm not saying man, because I make consciously say, we all have this divine, if I'll use the term masculine energy within us. And so everybody's included in the conversation. But I needed other people, and I need to get over my fear of connecting. And this is how I did it. And this is where it's brought me today.
I find it fascinating, and this may be something that continues on into our next session. But I wanna ask this because here we are in a world where we're trying to get out of the binary and speaking in binary components, and yet when I look out at all the power dynamics within the political and the cultural, and the political and the business, I see men. I see the male dominating in all of the political and economic fronts, at least up to about 80%. And what I believe is, and what I would like to have for discussion is that what would be the value of these people who are in the current power dynamics to injecting more compassion into how they experience. I mean, what you were talking about, Rick, about having the experience of being a personal caretaker for a child, how that impacted you and to where you and opened your heart in ways that you couldn't have it. And I'm wondering how so many of the men who are in power today who have not had the experience or not been able to be exposed, and I'm wondering how compassion I'm not just wondering. I believe that if we were able to open and expose compassion to them, that everything would change, that we would begin to move things in the right direction. So I would like to have that as your thoughts on that, especially as we're dealing with the gender and power dynamics that are in the world today. Please, Sara.
Thank you, Dennis. I just wanted to go before I share some thoughts on that what would happen if you bring compassion into the public sphere, let's say, or political arena, or where decisions are made. I actually just had a thought that I hadn't mentioned or voiced before. I guess it didn't occur to me. Dennis, you said, we also talked about this. We're trying to create a more inclusive language, and Donna and I talk about that within Women and Girls, and the power of words. And so, Clay, when you say you're in search of the new compassionate male, as the new archetype, for me, what just came through as you were both sharing is, why aren't we calling it, or how about calling it just the new compassionate archetype? How would that change the conversation? Who would feel included, who would not? And it goes with the same with talking beyond gender and just talking about compassion as a universal compass for us to work, like that framework to work within. Are we not also, even though we're saying male, you're not excluding anybody, but are we not with this language also still maintaining some of that conditioning that we've all grown up with? It's just a thought, Clay, I think you're muted.
First to do that. So I love that, and I agree with it. I believe it's a yes and here's why. And I've never thought about the new compassionate archetype, and that's a real takeaway for me today. What I also see is that there's work that men can only do with men. That so many men have gone through some recovery program and they're looking for something a bit more spiritual, but they're not going to go back to church. They equate that because they got burned with church. They're not going to go back there. And they can speak deeply with their spouse or their partner, but only just so deep. They've got to connect with another man. And we don't trust each other. And because of that, we're sitting in the center, isolated, the lone wolf, and we're festering here. And we're dying because of that, or we're killing other people because of it. So part of the new compassionate archetype, one piece of that is men going off to do their work with them so that we can raise our consciousness so we can come at a higher level to the table. So I love what you asked. That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Sara. Cynthia?
Thank you, Sara and Clay. And I also agree, Sara, that being inclusive is so important. And there is so much violence against girls and women. It is, as a South African president said, it is the second pandemic next or alongside COVID, right? And has been. And my only concern with not naming men and women or whoever's in the picture is there can be a bypass for those that need to show up and need to do their work. You know what I mean? It'd be like white people not showing up because we put everyone together as one race or something like that.
Yes, that was Cynthia. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's the question that I want to have, is because when we look at the power dynamics of the world, men are in the top power dynamic. And this is the power dynamic, and there is an actual layers that we have in the patriarchy. Rick, would you, I mean, am I understanding that correctly? Because if we talk about, because men hold the power, right? So that if we cannot give ourselves a pass. We actually, this In Search of the New Compassionate Male is addressing that particular wound and that particular, even though it is not exclusive, it is inclusive, but it makes sure to focus in that way.
That's how I take Clay's and your titling of the In Search of the New Compassionate Male is we have to be addressing so many different fronts at once in our time. And there are a good number of people in our world who and communities that are focused on raising compassion in many different ways. But to have one that is specifically focused on where, let's admit it, a lot of the problem is carried and enacted. By the way, is my sound okay? I may have.
Oh, it's wonderful.
It's okay. So just that's why I think there's a lot to be said on that front. And then if I can just connect that to Clay's very moving description of his own transformation just now. I mean, the transformation that he had years ago, like up at the top of the Empire State Building. I mean, you look at so many men of power at the top, and so many, and then when their souls get bared by some crisis, some fall from grace, some scandal that emerges, you just see what an unhappy, vulnerable, wounded person is inside that the appearance of strength and power and confidence. And I think what our society as a whole across the world in so many ways in these patriarchal systems have sustained is men in power who, one, have not gone through deep initiatory experiences, have not gone through some kind of rite of passage, which so many indigenous societies had carried for centuries, which in some sense helps mediate a dying to an old identity and an awakening to a larger, deeper identity, a larger compassionate relationship to the whole, to the community, to the land, and to each other, and also very much getting in touch with both masculine and feminine dimensions inside our own psyche, every individual. And lacking that initiation, we have all these people in power around the world who are basically kind of adolescents who are locked into an old identity. And what changes that, if it isn't done through initiation, is typically some kind of near-death experience or crisis approaching that. And Clay just described one of his own, the heart attack and so forth. And what that made him, there is nothing that reconfigures our moral values as powerfully as an encounter with our own mortality. And that involves a letting go of our own of our past identity. We're required to somehow open up to something deeper, bigger, but only through a kind of loss, only through a kind of initiatory descent. And I think it either will happen spontaneously out in life, as our civilization is doing right now, or it happens through the wisdom of the elders.
Yes, exactly.
Initiatory rituals.
Yes, Donna.
Brilliant, Richard. Thank you. I wanted to just follow up on that. When you said adolescence, I've been looking back and forth because I'm just little notes of inspiration. And when you mentioned, as you were saying, adolescence, I see things on a really global, spiritual, shifting canvas, I guess. And so for me, my everyday living is also a global event, a cosmic event, a spiritual event. And in my faith background as a pagan, this is a shift from one era to another era. And so the shift happened in December of 2020. We are like less than a year into a new era on planet Earth. And so why are we having all these conversations? Why are we having all these like expansive, wow conversations? Because the invitation cosmically is to do that, to move from adolescence. We've been in adolescence for 2,500 years as a society. And now it's time to move into our maturity. And we are having a near-death experience. That was what we're doing in this pandemic and COVID. This is a near-death experience for all of us. And some of us are going to make the shift and transition, and we're going to be, there's two stories going on. The one that is dying right now and the one that is being co-created. And we're either in the camp of people who do not know how to shift, or we are the ones in the co-creating the new so that they can come along with us, right? So I see a panel of lighthouses here who have been lit up and who are showing up in their own centered alignment to say, the story doesn't work for me anymore. In fact, in my very cells, in my holy cells, because first and foremost, we are whole and holy beings. We are not missing anything. We are not without. We have everything. We are 100% nanoparticles of God, whatever God means to you. We are the vibration of love incarnate. And that is the story that at least Sarah and I and our beloved core group of women at Women and Girls and the Charter for Compassion, I believe all of you are doing the same thing. We're not marching. We are playfully in wonder going into what else is there. And Clay's exploration of new compassionate male, like, thank you, because let's do it together. Together. Those words right now are like this, flowing. And we move really quickly from domination, right? Domination, we're moving from domination to partnership. Yeah. Right. So then we're looking at each other right in the eyes in our holiness. So I can look in your eyes and see God and say yes.
Amen. Yeah. Can I jump in there, Dennis? You're on mute, Dennis. Initiation. I so appreciate that topic. And Karambu, we've talked about that, and you've shared on the podcast about initiation, some powerful information. And would you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Clay, thank you. So I say that there are systems in which we have been socialized. And for us, there is initiation for men, and there is for women. And for women, we are working to change it so that we are not mutilating women's bodies. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the boy child's initiation, because it's a way of indoctrinating into the young men a way of living as men. And in their way of living, it is totally exclusive of women, especially if women are not below the men, that like totally dominated, totally the objects, unowned object for men. That is who women are. And so in that initiation, there's a programming that happens in there. And it teaches young men to totally separate themselves from the feminine, so to speak. And for me, that is totally disconnect with their mother, totally disconnect from everything that is feminine in their lives. And in our work, I have observed that it has worked to have men forget to go within and listen, because all the initiation is about what the outside is teaching you and telling you you are. So the men have forgotten who they are. So they live this life thinking that they are living a male, like a man's life, but they're really living someone else's story. And so our work is about awakening that, listening to oneself. But how can you listen to yourself? How can I listen to myself if I don't even know that I got off that route? So the work is to bring us back home to who we are here in the heart. And once we are there, then we can step out and see what is outside. And for me, the story of the search for compassionate male is about coming back home to hear me and to recognize that until I do that, I'm speaking someone else's story. And the calling is, what's my new story?
Oh, that is profound. Will, we have not heard from you on this subject. Do you have just a couple of minutes before we end, before we move to this next, or do you want to share in the next one, in the next panel that we're going to have in the second 45?
Well, let me just offer a little vignette of what happens in our work, because my faith in men and the humanity of men has been profoundly restored by the work and what we've witnessed. The writer Bell Hooks says that men are required, young men and boys are required to self-mutilate parts of themselves and destroy part of their humanity. And if they don't do it, their peers and their elders will do it for them. And this is a reality that men are actually suffer greatly from that type of conditioning. And yet when they're given a chance to really understand what's happened to them and to really understand the cost to women in their lives, it's unbelievable what they can come up with. And just to give you one example, in one of our programs, what we do is we go through a deep process of truth-telling and then a kind of a mutual compassionate awakening. And it's a lot of tears and it's very powerful and sometimes very intense. And then at the end of all of this, the men and the women each create a ceremony to honor the other. And in one of these cases, the men built a throne and they put a big label over the top. It said, Throne of the Divine Feminine. And they put all these beautiful decorations. And then in the ceremony, they invited the women one at a time to come and sit in that throne. They then kneeled before each woman sitting in this throne of the Divine Feminine. I mean, these men came up with this. I could never have thought of this. And if I had, I would never have imposed it. It was a you had to be there moment. But these men put this together and they kneeled before each woman and they basically acknowledged her beautiful qualities. And then they concluded by saying, we give back to you your feminine sovereignty that was unjustly stolen.
That's an initiation.
These are
Exactly.
ordinary men basically returning the sovereignty that was stolen from women.
And we are in session 2 of barely touching the subject, but going deep at the same time about In Search of the New Compassionate Male. Welcome everyone back. This is the same panel that we had before. And, one of the things that struck me, and I'm going to toss this as a question out for everyone to share upon, is the is what you, Karamba, what you talked about In Search of the New Compassionate Male, is searching inside ourselves. That it was there, and it is always there all along. It has to come from the inside out. This isn't something that I'm going to search for and find out there. It has to be something that I have to look inside. And Rick, you were talking about having the kinds of transformative experiences near death, or some kind of an experience that would actually change us and be able to move. So I would like to talk about some of the, and really to understand some of the experiences that you've had in your life, like you were talking about, Rick, that have actually turned you toward understanding the value of compassion and how this works in both men and women and here on the planet.
Well, just to pick up where we left off, I was just about to thank Dr. Karambu for for sharing what she did, because it helps remind me that every society has its initiations, and initiations can either indoctrinate one into a rigid stereotype of how to be in that society that could be quite oppressive, or it can, while there are other initiatory rites of passage that awaken one to the larger mystery of being, and to the larger wholeness in ourselves. So that there's Clay, for example, I'm sure went through an initiation into the Marines that required him to become a certain type of male. People are initiated as they come into the business world, men and women, as to how to be in that world. And so there are initiatory practices that can be as pathological or as life-enhancing. The full spectrum is there. And so our task, I think, has to do with finding those transformational experiences. And as for example, I think the work that you, Karambu, and Cynthia and Will do in the gender and equity and reconciliation, and just that is so much creating a container and a supportive transformational vessel that can permit that an initiation into a new way of being that is life enhancing in relationship to the natural world, in relationship to the full range of genders, and in relationship to our experience of the divine, all of which are so interconnected, as you've all been pointing out.
Sarah,
Yeah.
as you have seen yourself work on compassion within yourself to really to show the transformative power of compassion in your life.
I'm going to bring it back to something I shared on our panel earlier with the women and girls in terms of having a partnership with oneself and the divine that I believe is also within myself. For me, the work of compassion was really tapping into go beyond who I am as a woman, and go to who I am as a soul. And then go to my teachings and say, what is being said to every human soul? Because what I believe and what I'm following and modeling for my children is we're all created from different, in different tribes and sub-tribes and genders, but we're all one soul. And if I can work from that awareness when I interact with others, regardless of who they are. So if I'm able to, then everyone else is able to too. But I made a conscious decision an intention to remain connected to that one truth. So it came with my self-awareness, right? And I found out, okay, here's exactly where I can start acting from that space. In terms of how I'm supporting compassion in the men in my life, one thing is I'm modeling it for my daughters, sisters, friends. I'm seeing the impact. I don't need to do other than model this concept. In terms of the men, I wanted to go back to what Clay had said in the other panel about feeling alone or creating something especially for men. I actually, a couple of days ago only, I mentioned Clay's work to my husband because he finds himself mentoring a lot of men. They'll come to him with their, problems and, give us our advice. And he himself found himself in the position of feeling alone when something arose between the two of us. Now, he knows I hold a container for him. I'm his safe space. But I learned to set a boundary and say, there is something I cannot do for you. That work you have to do yourself, but you have to seek out the men in your life.
Yes.
And feel okay to say these things. And because he'll come to me, he's so alone, I'm going to go and be with him. And I say, great. But I said to my husband, this is exactly what Clay's book is about that I gave you. If you take the time to look at this is exactly what Clay said. Why do men find themselves alone in this? Why do we now I'm talking as a man, but in the position from my husband, why am I not reaching out and saying, I'm not weak. Compassion is not a soft skill. I talk a lot about that, right? It takes courage and vulnerability. Why is it so hard? So I have to hold that space, but also lead. So I said to my husband, this is my boundary. I cannot help you any more than this. I'll hold space, but I ask you to go out and search the men in your life and then support one another. So I don't, it is that's where I see my role as a woman being, as a wife being, even for my son. Compassion is something that was very hard for him to see when he was suffering, for me to see his suffering and wanting to fix it and learning I don't have to fix it. I need to focus on men, having compassion for myself and hold space for him. Right. It's just by modeling. I'm getting the confirmation day in, day out from the response I get from the people I'm with.
Sarah, I'd like to build on what you were saying there. Just a very quick little anecdote. I've had men in the circle come for 6 or 8 months, and then they disappear for a couple of months, and they show back up. And I've asked them, the answer is similar most every time. I said, well, what brought you back? Well, my wife made me come back because she said that when I was going to the men's circle every week, that I was much easier to get along with.
There's a lot of freedom in it, right?
Yes. Clay, you recently did a video, a 45-minute video that were excerpts from many of the people that are on the screen here today that are in the video, basically the vignettes talking about that. But you started it off with Julian Corman, his song, "A Boy Alone," which is so much of, and I love because what you said, Sada. We do. Well, I know when I grew up, being at 73, I grew up in the early 50s, and in South Texas, and I thought I was the one broken person. I looked at myself inside myself, and I looked out there, and I went, Well, when people talk about what a man is supposed to be, the stereotype of what it is, that is not me. And I don't know what, and nobody told me that there was anything else other than I must be crazy. So I took it on myself, and I had this deep loneliness and dysfunction. And it was a long path to be able to come back from that. But it has been an exquisite journey and so worthwhile in being able to and to be able to have it. Do you, Cynthia, do you have a sense of being able to have and model compassion for the men that you see in your life, for the people that identify as males, and see it from the outside? What's your perspective?
So I have a couple comments about that, and yes is the answer. First, I want to start off by saying that women are often, I've found over the course of my work, 20 years in this work of gender equity and reconciliation, that speaking with women who do women's groups alone, they're often very timid, or they're concerned about coming into a group with men. And the same is true for the men that I've talked with that are just doing men's work. There's a trepidation or something, a concern, and of what it will be like. And what I've experienced is it's just amazing to have so many men in my life that are conscious, that are working on this, that show up. And I can't imagine it any other way. So I just encourage people to come into those safe spaces with people who are of different genders, whatever their gender, and learn about each other. My own personal experience, my Me Too story, which I'll share briefly, was the time where I had to go deeper into a place of compassion. 20 years ago, I worked for a corporation in the United States, in Indianapolis, and I just finished my master's degree. I had made it. I was working in a corporation where the co-chair and the founder, co-chair of the board, no, the chairman of the board and the founder of this corporation was someone I had studied about in school. He was uplifted as the guru of wellness, world-renowned health and wellness. And I was going to be working with him and traveling with him. Well, within 3 months of working there, he sexually propositioned me over a business dinner. He said, "Cynthia, I've enjoyed getting to know you. Now it's time to take our relationship to a deeper, more intimate sexual level." I'll never forget those words. And I said no, and he didn't hear my no. He continued to pressure me. And then the whole leadership in the corporation, the CFO, the CEO, all of them worked to bring me down. And they hired attorneys. They hired 5 attorneys, and I had to hire an attorney, and it got pretty ugly. And when I was pushed out of that corporation within a matter of weeks, I didn't trust men. I didn't like men. I didn't want to be around men. I didn't know how to be in my own body, how to dress, how to show up. And I was in therapy like 2 or 3 times a week. I had an attorney that wanted me to just cut their throats and throw every book at them. And I was trying to find, what is the problem here? Where is the deeper compassion? How do I understand this? Even though I was deeply hurt and wounded and I didn't have trust. I didn't have trust for the women either, because they betrayed me as well, because they had to stay in their jobs, to keep their jobs. They didn't talk to me. They turned their backs on me. So I walked away from that. I mean, I got pushed out, but I had lost pretty much everything. And I had to start over. And over the course of a few years of deep healing and coming into the work that I'm doing now with Will and Karambu and others in our global community, over those few years, I came to a place of turning my anger and betrayal into deeper understanding and deeper compassion for that we're all in this together. And we are all in a system of oppression and violence. We see it every day in the news. And that's not to, I also know we're also in a world and in a system of love, of compassion, and that, but we can't disregard the things that are happening out there, the violence against all of us. We have to address those to be able to move through it, just like I did in my Me Too story, to move through it and come to a place of compassion, of love, of deeper understanding.
How profound. So what are your thoughts on it, Will? Do you feel that it's possible that less than 50% would take, that the tipping point could be a smaller amount to get men in order to make this shift in consciousness?
Definitely. And I think there's research to that effect. I can't remember the percentages, but I think it's quite a bit less than 51%. And part of the reason for that is that actually, in my understanding, most men really want this once they get in touch with what they really want. Most men are not violators. In the terms of the campus rape, for example, studies showed that about, remember there was a couple of years ago, all this concern about rape on campus. And they found that 90% of the rapes are committed by 3% of the men who are repeat offenders, and whose hands would be slapped and they'd go right back out and at it. So the vast majority of men are not rapists or sexual predators. And what we've learned in our work is that men, when they truly hear and understand the pain of the other, and in particular the pain of women, they can't remain the same men. They do not remain the same men. And they are so inspired to begin to discover these deeper dimensions of themselves. There's a saying that the longest journey a man will ever take is the 18 inches from his head to his heart. And when they take that journey, men awaken to who they truly are. That mask, that false identity that Rick was referring to earlier, falls away. And then they discover, in terms of the gender oppression, what men discover is that the greatest male privilege is not any of the social advantages afforded to them, not being in those positions of power. The greatest male privilege is to actively participate in deconstructing the unjust gender oppression, system of gender oppression itself. And men, once they see that and get a chance and a skillful way to participate, I see them just loving to be part of it. That's been my experience.
What a lovely. Carambo, you've seen that in the young men that attended Clay's workshop when he was there, and then the work that they've continued from there.
Yes, I did see the change in their lives, and I will say this: there's a way that the systems that we live in make us think in certain ways. And so for the men, for the young men in my home, in my family, the 2000 family, they realize that there is a mask that they wear. Every day when they step out, they have to think about which mask they're going to wear, how they want to show up in the world that day. And they're not thinking about who they want to step out being. They want to be who others will see them as. And so for some of them, it was in the beginning confusing, because they thought, oh, this is what it means to be a man. And then we are saying there's a different way of being. Think about removing that mask. How does it feel? What is it inviting you into? And one of the things that I can share that has really deeply shown that change is one of the kids went to his family this last weekend, and they are very macho in the way they are as a tribe. And he talked to them about the circle with Clay. And he also talked to them about the last Gender Equity and Reconciliation workshop that he attended. And he told me what was most amazing was that the men came and sat down and listened to what he had to say. And they were like, how did we not know this? And so what he has decided to do now is to expand his male circles, because he has seen the power of these things that men have never thought about, have never heard about, but is really calling into them, because they know that they are not at ease in this culture that has been created for them to be male, to be men. And so it really works, and it really, I feel like there's a shifting that is happening, because a lot more men are stopping to listen to this way of being. Because compassion, like I was telling my friend this afternoon, is compassion is not just about recognizing something is happening to someone and empathizing with them. It is also doing something about it, because something was happening and they were saying, oh, that's a family thing. I said, no, this is how systems have remained the way they are, because we say that's the way it has been, but it is our calling to do something about it. So for me, compassion is about, yes, I can put myself in someone else's shoes, but that it doesn't end there. I feel compelled to do something about it. Thank you.
Donna.
Yes. Cheers to that.
Amen.
Cheers to that. Amen. Amen. Right. As I've been listening to this, I've been jotting down some notes about like, what are the skills that we need to continue doing these conversations and continue opening our hearts and our language and our narrative, so that we, while we're watching a system compost, right? Because we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're watching it compost. We're not here to like thrash a patriarchal system. We're here to mature it, right? So in maturing, what does compost do? So anyway, some of the skills that I've been recognizing that has been helpful for me is that when stories come up and out that are our stories of domination, I thank them for showing up. And I go, if I don't see it and I don't acknowledge it, I can't release it, right? So I can't release what I don't acknowledge. And so the pain, the trauma, the separation, the divide and conquer, I have to see how it shows up in my life. Even sometimes it's an internal conversation going on in my head. Then I can say, oh, Donna, what was that thought, right? And I go, oh, wait a second. That's the enculturated, embedded story that's been in my brain for 55 years on this planet. This is what I've grown up with. So I have to acknowledge it. I have to see it. And I have to be present to the grief and to move through the grief, to get to the healing, to come together, right? To the coming together today. So these stories of domination are begging us to acknowledge them so that we can release them and we can create this new compassionate archetype, like Sarah said earlier. So it goes back to, you asked about the personal stories, Dennis. And for me, I have been since I was 4 years old, defiant to the pain and the trauma in the world. And I'm like, no, thank you to what's unsafe, right? I am defiant to it. And anybody that's known me knows I come with two swords to say no to that pain. But I realized that even that was continuing the pain because that's what I was focusing on. So I recently moved out of my defiance to the pain and trauma of the world, and I moved into devotion to what feels safe and sacred to me. So instead of saying no, I say, no, thank you. This is where I'm safe. This is where I'm co-creating new paradigms and new conversations. I don't have to be defiant to what's meant to compost. I can be benevolent and beautiful to what's meant to compost and be devoted to what we are co-creating in harmony together. Amen.
Clay, you have been coming into your own voice. I have watched you over the time that I've known you come from speaking and actually connecting with your voice during this process. Has this time when you've been connecting with people through your In Search of the New Compassionate Male podcasts and the work that we've done together been a big part of that?
It's been an incredible part of it. I go back to 2008, and I was in a circle, and they could not hear me. They said, okay, we're going to do this until we can hear you. And I thought I was shouting. That's how much voice I had lost. And the more that I'm looking and the more that I'm learning from each of you and with each person that we interview and talk, the more I'm finding myself and I'm finding my voice. And I think that is a reflection of having the peace within, knowing that I've still got a lot of work to do and looking forward to that work.
Yes. And there's so much that we're coming through. Richard, are you back?
Testing 1, 2, 3. How does
you are here, Rick? As a society, I don't believe in from your understanding of this, and I also want anyone else's. I believe it's not going to take 50% over, 51% of the men coming to this. The tipping point may be much smaller in order to make a change in consciousness of the human being. As you in your background in psychology and your background and your work in philosophy, is that possible?
The irony of when I was trying to speak and it was saying my mic was on, but obviously I wasn't. Well, two things. The irony is that I was going to suggest that you actually call on Donna rather than me because I'd seen Donna put her hand up. And so I'm trying to say, no, go up to Donna, leave me.
Boy, then, that is you are more powerful than you know.
And then, what a to not have a voice when you're speaking was like a kind of initiatory experience in itself. Like, I'm generally accustomed to, two things. One is, I'm a professor. I speak. People listen. I give lectures online and so forth. And to not have one's voice available to one suddenly is a big shift. But then to recognize that we've set up a culture, many cultures across the world, in which many people's voices have been excluded for centuries, and in these individualized for their whole life. They maybe can speak to somebody, but not to all who they wouldn't want to reach or need to reach. And so, I've had now two great learning experiences today. One was learning not to from Karambu, not to idealize all indigenous initiatory rituals, because those too can be confining or mutilating or oppressive, as well as the richer potential that is there. And then the other is just a little reminder of what it's like to not have a voice that can be heard.
Oh, Rick, thank you. Thank you so much. Will, do you have any closing thoughts on our session today, our far too short session on the beginning of where we're going? Could you wrap up some things for us as we go around the room?
Sure, thank you. I think what I want to close with is that want the training to become the compassionate male, but they're just not in touch with it. And even the power of compassion to transform even men in power. I'm reminded of a story of just very briefly in one of our programs, there was a woman in the Parliament of South Africa who was having to challenge the president because he was denying AIDS. This was back. And she had a visionary experience in our program working with the holotropic breath work, if you know of that, developed by Stan Groff. And so anyway, long story short, she had a vision in which she was given a vision of the president and his mother. And the president was a little boy, and his mother became this towering presence. And the mother spoke to Nozizwe and challenged her to challenge him. And it really became a case of speaking feminine wisdom to patriarchal power, if you will, speaking truth to power. And that experience gave her the courage to actually defy him and reverse the nation's AIDS policy. And so it was an amazing transformation that took place. And she launched a whole campaign to bring treatment action campaign to South Africa. So for that story, what I took away from that was that even the most patriarchal male, and I don't mean to blame the president at the time, President Mbeki, but on that issue, it seemed like he was quite off base, is powerless in the face of the truth and the truth of feminine wisdom being brought forward in a compelling way. And I think that what is happening now is that the feminine wisdom is rising, and there is a profound balancing that is finally beginning to take place on a level that we've been needing for centuries, but is now beginning to happen in practical ways. So I think it's a very inspiring.
I agree. Thank you, Will. Karambu, do you have some closing
Absolutely.
thoughts for us, please?
Yes, I do. I love this African proverb that says, until the lion learns to write, the story always glorifies the hunter. And in this conversation, what I feel we are called or being invited into is to really know our story, to really know who I am and why I am here. For me, I am here to be love, light, and harmony for the healing and peace of the world. But until and unless I heal and I have compassion for myself, how can I be compassion for someone else? So the invitation is create a new story. Create a new story from that place of inner knowing, not the outside world that is asking for masks, but to really stop and listen within, get my new story, and then step into the invitation for I am whole, I am pure, I'm complete, and I'm enough, and so is everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirambo. Thank you so much. Cynthia?
So my closing words are that we need each other. And as a person that identifies as a woman, I need those who identify as men to come into the conversation, that we all need to do our own work and then come together and do our work together. And as we walk down the street, or in our homes, to remember that we've all been through and are in, even now, as I think, Donna, you were describing just all that we're going through in the world. And the stage that we're in this transitional period, this great turning, as Joanna Macy would say, of coming into the new, and we have our own story. And so to go lightly, go gently, go with sensitivity to one another, and go in prayer. There is no better time than to have a practice of some kind, and let that practice and that inner knowing and that inner conversation with the ultimate reality be our guide. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Sada?
Thank you, Cynthia. That landed deep. For me, so here's I am resonating with everything everyone has shared, and then I have this another thought-provoking thing. For me, I believe the compassionate archetype is already out there, has been here always. I believe we need to, well, not we need to, I am at least returning to creator. I think creator has been abused since whenever. I believe creator is alive, and I think that unified thought could unify us. That one source that we're all connected to in one, whatever way we express it. And it starts, I'll share my mantra, my motto is, a better world starts with me. It is the responsibility of mine to keep proclaiming this, to keep holding myself and everyone else around me accountable on this. What are you doing? What am I doing? All day and every day to make this archetype the single most important driving force in healing the world. Thank you.
Sada, thank you so much. Rick?
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to pick up on a couple of things that have just been said, and as a parting thought. One is that, as we're working with the great challenges of our time, and including what we're talking about in this room, the effort to bring about a healing of genders and a healing of our relationships to each other, but healing of wholeness into our own wholeness. As we look at patriarchy and it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to get overwhelmed by the wounding, by the trauma that's happened out there. And in terms of the world going through a transformational rite of passage and a near-death experience, yes, COVID, of course, has been the pandemic has been a very tangible event. But of course, the climate catastrophe is our larger, more encompassing initiatory encounter with mortality, and we are all up against. All of us, I think, as individuals, can sense we have some influence within small circles, et cetera. But the problem is so huge. How can we have aspirations for the future? And I just want to place this idea of the role of hope in dealing with the great challenges of our time, that our hope is not just a kind of rational optimism based on the data that we conclude we've got a great chance for the future, that we have a good chance for a happy future. Rather, hope is more like it's a spiritual virtue, and it's a spiritual discipline that we cultivate. And in doing so, hope actually, I think, plants a seed in the future that helps bring the future into being. It's an intervention. Just our attitude of hope is an intervention in itself. It makes a difference. And having that, cultivating that attitude is something that we can do by what all of you have been saying, which is tapping into the larger divine love that suffuses the universe and suffuses our own depths. And if we can get in touch with that, then we have lots of grounds for hope.
Thank you, Rick. Dear Donna?
I can just bring in maybe 30 seconds of, Clay, you said something earlier about about the binary, right? But you also have a lunar solar event that you did, right? So it's a both and. We do live in a binary world. The sun comes up and then the moon comes up. So we also have a cosmic world. And so we're doing a both and, right? We can't get rid of the binary. And this is a process and a conversation. And I heard a song come to my head at the beginning of 2020, and it was David Bowie's Golden Years. And at the end of 2020, I was like, well, that wasn't very golden. And then I heard it. It was golden years. We're in it for a decade. Yeah. If we are going to disassemble things, we're in it for a decade at least. Yeah. So know it's a process.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all my precious friends. I feel so close to you. I feel this to me is how the connection works. And yes, we are doing it virtually, but we're going from virtual into this consciousness. And I am deeply connected to you all. Thank you very much. All right, thanks. Clay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful for everybody.
Thank you so much.